Claude responded. When my daughter got married, I kept the ultimate secret. When my daughter got married, I kept the ultimate secret. I never told her new husband's family that I owned the entire vineyard they'd been circling like vultures. And thank God I stayed quiet, because exactly 9 days after I paid for their $1 million wedding, my brand new son-in-law walked into my study with a lawyer and a stack of papers meant to strip me of everything I had left. But the confidence on his face disappeared completely the second he realized the document he was pushing across my desk was about to become his own downfall. Before I tell you how it all came apart, let me know where you're tuning in from tonight, folks. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe family loyalty means nothing once greed gets its claws into somebody you love. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 66 years old. I spent 38 years as a union electrician, climbing poles in the middle of Wisconsin winters, coming home with hands so cracked from the cold they'd bleed if I closed a fist too fast. I raised my daughter Casey on overtime pay and a stubborn refusal to ever ask anybody for a handout. I drive a 15-year-old Silverado. I wear the same 3 flannel jackets on rotation. To my new son-in-law, Marcus, I was exactly what I looked like, a tired old lineman living out his last years in a modest brick house on the edge of town. He had no idea that my late wife, Diane, had come from old Sonoma County money, the kind of quiet, generational wealth that never shows up on a Facebook profile. Diane and I chose to live simple, not because we had to, because we wanted Casey to grow up understanding the value of $1 before she ever learned the size of one. Marcus only ever saw the surface. 9 days before that afternoon in my study, I'd wired $340,000 to cover the wedding. Casey said she'd always dreamed of a vineyard reception 2 states away, calligraphy invitations, a string quartet flown in from Chicago, a dress that alone cost more than my first truck. I didn't complain. I didn't even blink. Casey was my only child, and after Diane passed, giving her that day felt like the last piece of a promise I'd made at her mother's bedside. And now, 9 days later, Marcus was sitting across from me at my own desk, sliding a folder toward my hands like he was doing me a favor. "Walter," he said, voice syrupy with fake concern. "Casey and I have been talking. We're worried sick about you rattling around this big house all alone. Your knees aren't what they used to be. And honestly, at your age, upkeep like this just isn't safe anymore." I kept my face still. "My knees are fine, Marcus. I mow my own lawn. I fix my own gutters. I mow my own lawn." He waved a hand like I was a confused child mumbling nonsense. "Things change fast at your age, Walter. 1 week you're fine. The next you're on the ground and nobody finds you for 2 days. Casey and I think it's time we start managing things for you. There's a wonderful assisted living community 40 minutes from here. Very affordable. But first, we need you to transfer the deed to the house into a trust our trust, so we can handle the sale and use the proceeds for your care. Whatever's left over, we can set aside for our own family's future." The air went out of my lungs. A facility. He was sitting in the house where I'd carried Diane over the threshold 41 years ago, telling me he was going to lock me away and cash in the profits to fund his own future. I looked past him toward the hallway. My daughter, Casey, was standing there in a cashmere sweater I didn't recognize, staring hard at her phone, refusing to meet my eyes. She was 29 now, a grown woman, the same little girl I'd taught to change a tire in our driveway, whose community college tuition I'd paid off in cash working weekend jobs on top of my union hours. "Casey," I said, my voice low, "are you hearing this? Do you agree with this?" She shifted her weight, finally looked up, but her eyes slid away fast, landing on the floor. "Dad, come on. Be reasonable. Marcus is right. You're getting older. We have to think ahead. It's just paperwork. It makes things simpler for everyone. Simpler for them." That's what she meant. The lawyer Marcus had brought a nervous young associate named Preston who clearly hadn't expected a family ambush, cleared his throat and asked quietly if I understood what I'd be signing. Marcus tapped his manicured finger against the paper. "Just sign it, Walter. We've got a flight to catch this afternoon. You know you can't keep up this place. We're doing you a favor." I looked at the pen. I looked at the document that would legally strip me of the roof over my head. I looked at my son-in-law, who viewed me as a stepping stone toward a comfortable retirement he hadn't earned, and at my daughter, who'd surrendered every ounce of her spine to let it happen just 9 days after I'd bankrolled the happiest day of her life. Something hot ignited low in my chest. But I'd spent 38 years learning that rage on a job site gets men killed. Rage in this room would only prove I was the unstable old fool they wanted the world to believe I'd become. I needed to be sharp. I needed to be patient. I reached toward the pen. I let my fingers tremble, performing the part of a broken old man giving up his last fight. As my hand hovered, my mind drifted backward, to the day Diane and I bought this house, a wreck of a place we spent 2 years rebuilding board by board. Every wall held a memory. Handing it to a man who saw nothing but square footage and resale value felt like spitting on her grave. "We're waiting, Walter," Marcus said, tapping the desk. "Preston bills by the hour." I let my hand shake harder. I needed them to believe they'd already won this round, so they'd never see the war coming. I pulled my hand back. I placed both palms flat on my knees and looked Marcus directly in the eye. The fake tremor vanished. My voice came out level, calm, and cold. "I'm not signing this. I'm not giving up my home, and I'm not moving into some facility so you two can fund your lifestyle." The silence that followed was total. Preston took a half step back, clutching his briefcase. Marcus's easy smile cracked into something uglier. "Excuse me? You're a retired lineman living on a pension in a house that should belong to us. You've overstayed your welcome in your own home, old man." I turned toward Casey. "Are you going to let him talk to your father like that?" She didn't apologize. Instead, she crossed the room and stood beside her husband, resting a hand on his arm in a show of unity that chilled me colder than any Wisconsin January ever had. "Marcus is right, Dad," she said, flat, detached, like she was discussing a merger instead of her own father's future. "We've been patient. Mom's been gone 3 years. Life moves forward. You're sitting on a house that's basically a gold mine, and it's wasted on one old man living alone." Marcus leaned over the desk. "Here's how this works. You sign the trust documents right now. Cooperate, and we'll make sure you get a nice room at Brookview. Refuse, and I call the police myself. I'll tell them my wife's elderly father is having a mental health episode, confused and combative, refusing to leave a property that legally isn't his anymore. They'll take you in for an evaluation. Once the state flags you as incompetent, taking control of everything you own becomes a formality." "Hey," I let my voice waver. "You'd really call the police on your own father-in-law?" "I'll tell them you're a danger to yourself," he said, ignoring the tremor in my voice completely. "Once you're in the system, this all becomes very, very easy." I let my shoulders slump. I let out a shallow, broken breath. "Please," I whispered, staring at my knees. "Please don't do this. I gave that girl everything I had." Casey rolled her eyes. "Stop the theatrics, Dad. It's embarrassing. Just sign it before Marcus loses his patience." I reached toward the pen again, let my hand shake so badly I knocked it clean off the desk. It rolled under my chair. "I'm so sorry," I mumbled. "My hands just won't cooperate today. I feel dizzy. I need a minute. My reading glasses are upstairs. I can't see the fine print without them." Marcus groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Go get your glasses. We're not leaving this room until you sign." I nodded meekly and shuffled toward the staircase, dragging my boots against each step like a man who'd already surrendered. Behind me, I heard Casey complaining to Marcus about how exhausting it was dealing with a stubborn old man. I let every word fuel the fire quietly building behind my ribs. The moment I reached the landing, the slump vanished from my spine. I walked straight into the bedroom I'd shared with Diane for 4 decades, locked the door, and pulled out my phone. I didn't need glasses. I could see perfectly well. I dialed a number I knew by heart, Rebecca Solis, the sharpest estate attorney in Milwaukee, the woman who'd spent 6 years quietly structuring everything Diane and I had built. "Walter," Rebecca answered, alert immediately. "Everything all right with the trust filings?" "Rebecca, I need you to pull my file right now. Marcus and Casey are downstairs with a lawyer, trying to force me into signing over the house, threatening to have me committed if I don't." A pause, then a dry laugh on the other end. "I told Diane he'd try something like this eventually. Tell me you haven't signed anything." "Not a word." "Good. Let them think they've won. We're going to let their own arrogance hang them." I told her everything. The wedding, the deed, the threat about the police. What I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Rebecca until this exact call, was what I'd overheard 3 weeks earlier at the Vineyard reception itself. I'd stepped away from the noise of the band, walking down a quiet hallway near the wine cellar, when I heard Casey's voice through a half-open door, sharp and businesslike, negotiating with someone on the phone. Not a bridesmaid, a commercial real estate broker who specialized in wine country properties. She was telling him they only needed a few more weeks to handle the old man's paperwork, that once the house was signed over and I was safely tucked into a facility, the real prize would follow because she knew, or thought she knew, about the property her mother's family had left behind in Sonoma. 110 acres of working vineyard, currently valued at just over $14 million, deeded entirely and irrevocably into my name 3 years before Diane passed, specifically so no future spouse of Casey's could ever touch it. Casey assumed it would simply pass to her once I was declared incompetent. She told the broker to start drafting liquidation paperwork. She wanted it sold to the highest corporate bidder the moment she gained control of my estate, and she wanted the money to fund a boutique winery brand she'd been dreaming about launching under her own name. The bathroom door had swung open right then, and Marcus stepped out adjusting his tuxedo jacket, and Casey had wrapped her arm around him and told him it was all coming together, that they just had to keep playing the loving children a little while longer. Marcus had smiled and told her it was flawless. That was the moment my daughter died to me, even though she was still breathing 30 feet away. I finished telling Rebecca all of it. She was quiet a long moment, then said, "Walter, your assets are ironclad. The Vineyard Trust is untouchable. They're hunting a ghost. Let them scheme. Prepare your defenses and come back downstairs." Play the part a little longer. I hung up, slipped an old pair of reading glasses onto my face for show, and took one long look at the photo of Diane on my dresser before heading back down. Downstairs, I told them I needed a week to have my own attorney review the paperwork before I'd sign anything. Casey scoffed. Marcus's temper snapped instantly. He grabbed the documents off the desk, crumpling them in his fist, screaming that I was selfish, that I was dragging them down, that if I didn't sign today I was dead to them, that any future grandchildren would never know my name, threatening unborn children to steal a house. I looked at my daughter's cold, unmoved face and understood, finally and completely, that Diane had been right to warn me. 6 months before she passed, Diane had gripped my hand and told me she was afraid of exactly this. She'd watched Casey's ambition curdle into something uglier every year, watched how quickly she absorbed Marcus's hunger for status. Diane made me promise to test our daughter's character before handing over anything real. I hadn't wanted to believe it would ever come to this. Standing in my own living room listening to threats about grandchildren I hadn't even met yet, I knew the test was over, and Casey had failed it completely. I packed an old duffel bag upstairs while I listened to a champagne cork pop in my own kitchen below. I found them toasting at the counter as I came down the stairs. "To finally getting rid of the dead weight," Casey said, clinking her glass against her husband's, laughing. I walked past them without a word, out the front door, into the cold. The deadbolt slammed shut behind me the second I cleared the porch. What they didn't know was that my duffel bag had a false bottom, and hidden inside was a small hard drive that had spent the last month quietly recording 4 hidden cameras I'd installed throughout the house weeks earlier. Back when I first noticed Casey's visits had started feeling like reconnaissance missions. I drove into Milwaukee that night, past the modest motels Casey assumed I'd be forced into, and checked myself into the penthouse suite of a hotel overlooking Lake Michigan, paid for with a black card tied to Diane's private trust. The valet barely blinked at my grease-stained boots. Over the following weeks, I watched everything through that footage. I'd left several boxes marked financial records in the basement before I left, carefully curated bait. Sure enough, 2 days after I walked out, Casey and Marcus tore through those boxes like animals, dumping old photographs and love letters onto the concrete floor without a second glance, hunting for account numbers. At the bottom of the 3rd box, exactly where I'd planted it, they found a red folder containing an expired medical power of attorney from a hip surgery I'd had 2 years earlier, a document that had granted Casey limited 30-day authority over medical decisions and nothing else, long since void. I watched them celebrate like they'd struck oil. I watched them bring in a corrupt local notary, a man named Devlin Pruitt, who for $20,000 in cash agreed to alter the document, strip the word medical from the header, forge my signature after 20 minutes of practice, and stamp it as a general durable power of attorney granting Marcus unchecked authority over my entire estate. I watched Casey explain to Marcus that they wouldn't bother with a traditional bank, too slow, too many background checks, too much risk someone would try to actually speak with me. Instead, she'd already lined up a predatory hard money lender who dealt exclusively in fast, high-interest loans backed by hard collateral. No questions asked. They planned to pledge the Sonoma Vineyard as security for an immediate $4.5 million loan, certain that once I defaulted, or once they had me declared incompetent, the lender would simply seize the land and they'd walk away with the cash free and clear. I let it happen. Rebecca wanted to file an emergency injunction the moment the fraud was confirmed, freeze everything before a dollar moved. I told her no. If we stopped it now, it stayed an attempted crime, something slick lawyers could argue down to a misunderstanding. I wanted them to actually take the money. I wanted the theft completed, fully executed, undeniable. I wanted them to build their entire fake future on top of it before the floor gave out. 2 days later, the $4.5 million cleared into their joint account, and the spending began almost instantly. Casey bought a customized Range Rover in cash and posted a dozen photos leaning against the hood. Marcus bought a collection of watches that cost more than my entire pension for the year. They flew first class to Napa to celebrate, posting about hard work finally paying off, while I watched every triumphant, tone-deaf post from a laptop in a hotel suite they had no idea existed. 3 weeks later, I flew to Sonoma, 2 days ahead of their scheduled arrival. I sat on the porch of the old stone farmhouse at the edge of the vineyard, a mug of black coffee warming my hands, and waited. Right on schedule, a convoy came grinding up the gravel drive, a black luxury SUV trailed by construction trucks and a cluster of well-dressed investors. Casey had lined up to fund her boutique winery brand on land she didn't legally own. She stepped out in oversized sunglasses, unrolling architectural blueprints across the hood of the SUV, gesturing toward the old vines she planned to rip out for a tasting pavilion. Then she looked up toward the porch and saw me. Her hand froze mid-gesture. The blueprint slipped from her fingers. Marcus went the color of ash. They genuinely believed I was locked away somewhere confused and medicated, and instead I was sitting comfortably on the porch of the $14 million property they were trying to steal, watching them with the calm of a man holding every card. Casey recovered first, marching toward the porch, waving the forged power of attorney like a battle flag, screaming to her stunned investors that I was suffering from severe dementia, that I had no legal standing here anymore, that security should remove me. The farmhouse door opened behind me. Rebecca Solis stepped out in a sharp navy suit, followed by 2 Sonoma County Sheriff's deputies. The construction crew cut their engines. The investors began backing toward their cars. Rebecca held up a federal court order, freshly signed, and announced clearly enough for every investor to hear that the document Casey was holding was a forged instrument, that hidden video and audio evidence proved conclusively that Casey Higgins Reyes and her husband had conspired to alter a legal medical proxy and commit wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and real estate fraud. Marcus's knees nearly buckled. The deputies moved past them entirely, walking straight toward Devlin Pruitt, who'd foolishly ridden along hoping for a second payday, and cuffed him on the spot for his role in the forgery. Casey wasn't done. She screamed that none of it mattered, that the $4.5 million loan was already secured against the land, that if I tried to stop anything now, they'd simply default and the lender would seize the vineyard anyway. "Either way we win," she shouted. "You lose." I set my coffee down and walked down the porch steps. I looked past my furious daughter and straight at my son-in-law, who was leaning against the SUV, struggling to breathe. "You forgot one thing about my wife's family," I said quietly. 3 years ago, long before Diane got sick, we placed this entire 110 acres into a permanent federal conservation easement. This land can never be subdivided, developed, or used as collateral for any commercial loan by anyone, ever. The asset you pledged for that $5 million doesn't legally exist on paper. Your loan was fraudulent before you ever forged a single signature. The investors were already dialing their own attorneys, scrambling back to their cars. The bulldozer operators began backing their machines out. Casey's face went white as the reality landed. "Since the collateral is void," Rebecca continued, The lender has already triggered the acceleration clause. They're demanding full repayment plus penalties, immediately, from both of you personally. Marcus dropped to his knees in the gravel, sobbing, grabbing at my jeans, begging me to fix it, to save him, promising anything. I didn't comfort him. I gave Rebecca a small nod. She opened a second folder, sealed in wax, and read from Diane's actual will, a private blind trust neither of them had ever known existed, worth exactly $8 million, structured to transfer entirely and irrevocably to Casey on her 35th birthday. No strings, no conditions, except one, a character clause. If Casey was ever found to have committed elder abuse against me, or attempted to force me from my home, or fraudulently mortgaged the vineyard before my natural passing, the entire trust would be permanently redirected to a children's burn unit in Milwaukee. As of the morning the fraudulent loan cleared, every condition had been triggered. The $8 million was already gone, already funding surgeries for children she would never meet. Casey's scream tore across the vineyard, raw and broken, the sound of watching your own greed set fire to a fortune that had been rightfully yours all along. Marcus was arrested within the week on federal fraud charges. Casey was indicted alongside him, out on bail with an ankle monitor, her friends and investors gone the moment the story broke. Their home was foreclosed, their cars were repossessed in the night. Marcus lost his consulting job before the ink on the indictment was even dry. I stayed at the farmhouse through that winter, wrapped in an old wool blanket on the porch, watching snow settle over the vines. I didn't rebuild it into anything gaudy. I turned part of the property into a quiet retreat for veterans battling addiction, hiring counselors, restoring the old barn into a peer support center, because Diane always believed real wealth was measured by what it healed, not what it displayed. Some folks will hear this and call me a hard man for letting my only daughter fall that far. Maybe I am, but I've learned, at 66 years old, after burying a wife and nearly losing everything I built with her, that love isn't a shield you hold up to protect somebody from the consequences of their own cruelty. Real love sometimes means stepping back and letting the fall happen, so there's finally something worth rebuilding underneath it. The pain of watching my daughter go down like that never really leaves you. But sitting here tonight, looking out over land Diane trusted me to protect, I know without a doubt I made the only choice that could ever have been right. If you've ever had to let someone you love hit rock bottom to teach them the truth, tell me about it in the comments below, folks. I read every one. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Claude responded, "Real love isn't measured by how much you shield someone from, it's measured by whether you let them grow up, even when it hurts to watch. Real love isn't measured by how much you shield someone from, it's measured by whether you let them grow up, even when it hurts to watch." Walter didn't win by hating his daughter, but by refusing to let her greed become the last word on who she could still become. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for the people we love is let the truth catch up with them, gently, so they finally have solid ground to stand on again. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to leave you with a genuine, positive lesson about life.